So, a few months ago, I made a video talking about the current issue with Formula E, which to this day is the most viewed video on this channel. A few months later, I made a video talking about the stupid point system WRC implemented, and then made a follow-up video 3 weeks later talking about how I would fix WRC. Given how well those videos did, and also taking a request from a couple of people on a Discord server I'm in, I thought I would talk about another series that's also going through some issues right now, and is heading down a similar path to another set of regulations that the series had in the past. The BTCC is the UK's most popular national racing series, and has been going on since 1958. The series has been through some up and down moments during its time, but from the early 2010s, the series has been at its most healthiest since the peak of the Super Touring era. However, since the beginning of last year, the series is currently going through a barren spell, and is looking like it is falling down the same road as what the Super Touring era did between 1999 and the turn of the millennium. But what has led to this? In this video, I will discuss how the series has got to this point, and discuss what solutions the series could do to try and stop them going down the same path as they did at the back end of the Super Touring era. This is the current issue with the BTCC. During the 1990s, the BTCC was going through a boom period thanks to the Super Touring regulations, which came into fruition at the beginning of 1991 as a way of phasing out the class system, which had confused many fans when they started tuning in for the first time on the BBC's popular sports programme Grandstand. These regulations attracted a lot of manufacturers, with the likes of BMW, Vauxhall and Ford, who were already in the sport during the class era, being joined by the likes of Toyota, Renault, Peugeot, Mazda, Nissan, Volvo, Alfa Romeo and Audi, to name a few. The regulations became so popular across the world that other racing organisations from those respective countries decided to either adopt those regulations for their respective racing series or set up a new championship which consisted of the Super Touring regulations. 1998 is branded by many fans to be the peak of the Super Touring era in the BTCC, as for that season, the series would end up having 9 manufacturer teams signed up for that season. This later would become 8 however, as Alfa Romeo, who were intending to run a part-time season with their 156, abandoned their plans to return to the BTCC to solely focus on the Italian Championship after the dates for that series' calendar was changed, which in turn clashed with the BTCC. The beginning of the 1999 season would turn out to be the beginning of the end for the Super Touring era, as out-of-control costs saw manufacturers drop out of the series, with Audi and Peugeot pulling out before 1999 and Volvo, Nissan and Renault pulling out before the turn of the millennium. This meant that for the 2000 season, there were only 3 manufacturer teams, each running 3 cars to not make the grid look small, which were Ford, Vauxhall and Honda. On top of this, there were also 2 one-car independent teams, both of which were running different versions of the Nissan Primera, and on top of this, there were also cars that ran to production regulations, which led to the return of a class system, only this time they wouldn't use a confusing point system for the outright championship. It was at this point, after 5 manufacturers pulled out in the space of 2 years, that something needed to change, not only to save the BTCC, but also to drive the costs down significantly. At the end of 2000, the Super Touring regulations came to an end, and were replaced by a new set of regulations known as BTC Touring. These set of regulations slashed the cost from the Super Touring era by around 40%. However, these changes came too late for both Ford and Honda, who pulled out of the series at the end of 2000, leaving Vauxhall as the only manufacturer left from that year. Despite losing these manufacturers though, the series would end up gaining some new ones, with Peugeot returning to the sport, this time ran by Whitley Motorsport. Yes, that same team that was doing some very suspicious tests around Zandvoort in the early 90s, and from the 11th meeting of 2001, MG would make their debut, ran by West Surrey Racing, the same team that ran the Honda programme at the back end of the Super Touring era. These regulations would also encourage more independent teams to enter, with them bringing in different car makers as well, such as JS Motorsport, who were using an Alfa Romeo 147, and ABG and Total Motorsport, who were both using a Lexus IS 200. Throughout the next couple of years, more manufacturers would enter, with Honda returning to the sport with the Civic, this time being ran by Arena International Motorsport, and Proton, who were being ran by the company itself under the name Petronas Cintium Proton, thanks to their sponsorship deal with Petronas. The series would continue to be a two-class championship, with the production class racing alongside the BTC touring cars until the end of 2003, when the series became a one-class championship again, thanks to there being enough teams competing in the BTC touring category. In 2004, and in an attempt to bring in more manufacturers, the series would bring in a second set of regulations that would be allowed to compete against the BTC touring regulations. These were the S2000 regulations, which proved to be very popular in the FIA European Touring Championship, later known as the World Touring Car Championship, as a result of the series visiting races outside of Europe thanks to the close racing and competitiveness the regulations produced. In order for these regulations to compete alongside the BTC Touring regulations, the BTCC would bring in an equivalency formula to ensure that the S2000 cars had a similar performance to the BTC Touring cars. This, as a result, attracted the attention of SEAT, who decided to enter the championship in 2004 with the same car that they used in the European Touring Car Championship, the Toledo Cupra. In 2007, after the championship was starting to attract big crowds again at the circuit, the series began to phase out the BTC Touring regulations, with the S2000 regs being the only ones eligible to compete for outright championship honours. Then, in 2011, a new set of regulations known as NGTC was brought in to slowly phase out the S2000 regulations. The S2000s would continue to be ran by some of the teams until the end of 2013, when every team on the grid switched to the NGTC regulations. The NGTCs would prove to be very popular, as on top of bringing back packed crowds to each race meeting, something that hadn't been seen since the Super Touring era, it would also see the number of cars increase, with around 27 to 32 cars on the grid between 2014 and 2023, with there being around 10 to 12 different car makers across the grid. It saw the BTCC be at its most healthiest since the Super Touring era. However, that would begin to change at the beginning of the 2020s. In 2022, the BTCC would introduce a new engine regulation for the NGTCs, as the series would follow in the footsteps of other racing series in introducing hybrid technology in order to play their part in improving their carbon footprint. Initially, the new engine regs appeared to work, as despite fears of the series becoming uncompetitive as a result of the series replacing success ballast with a push-to-pass system that is powered by the hybrid technology, the season was still very competitive and still produced a lot of exciting racing. However, the start of the 2023 season would see the start of the current barren spell, as before the season began, Team Dynamics, who were running Honda Civics, would announce that they would be taking a sabbatical from the series after over 3 decades of competing, with the team continuing to offer technical support to the rebranded One Motorsport team who were running Honda Civics. On top of this, the start of the 2023 season saw one less car maker on the grid, as the Affinity Q50, which was being used by Aidan Moffat Racing and Tony Gillam Racing, was no longer present on the grid, with Aidan Moffat Racing merging with One Motorsport, who were using Honda Civics, and Tony Gillam Racing merging with Team Hard, who were using Cupra Leons, which in turn would see 6 Cupras on the grid for 2023. In fact, the number of car makers dropping out had been an issue for a couple of years prior. If we take a look at the 2020 season, there were 10 different car makers, which you can see on your screen right now. However, the following season in 2021, although they would gain another car maker in Cupra, they would end up losing 3, in the form of Volkswagen, Mercedes and Audi, which in turn reduced the number of car makers from 10 to 8. Now, these car makers dropping out, along with the teams that were associated with them merging with other teams, could be associated with the pandemic at the time. But it was quite clear that when Team Dynamics pulled out before the 2023 season, which was nearly 2 years after things went back to normal in the world, combined with Infinity no longer being associated with the series as a result of the teams using them merging with other teams, that it wasn't a pandemic this time around that caused them to drop off the grid. And this was reaffirmed a year later, as at the time of recording, which is around a month away before the first meeting of the 2024 season, another team has dropped out of the championship. this being One Motorsport, who, like with their 2023 technical partners Team Dynamics, have decided to take a sabbatical from the series. Speaking of Team Dynamics, they will be returning to the championship in 2024, but not under the same guise as they were before, as like with many other teams before them, they have decided to merge with Accelerate Racing, who are running Hyundais. This, as a result, combined with One Motorsport taking a sabbatical and all the TBLs being taken for 2024, means that there will not be a Honda on the grid, meaning as a result, there will only be 6 car makers this season, which are Ford, Hyundai, Toyota, BMW, Cupra and Vauxhall. On top of this, as a result of teams either dropping out or merging, it has meant that the grid has been significantly reduced for 2024. To put some context on how much the grid has been reduced, in 2019 there were 30 cars on the grid that spanned across 14 teams. For 2024 on the other hand, there will only be 23 cars on the grid across only 7 different teams. It would have been 21 cars across 6 different teams as Team Hard initially pulled out of the series. However, just this week they went back on their word and announced that they would be running 2 Cupras for this season. Either way, that is a massive drop off from both areas, and something needs to change in order to prevent this trend from continuing in the future. So what is causing these issues? While some of these issues arguably stem from the pandemic in 2020, the main reason for the drop in grid size is the same issue the WRC is currently experiencing right now that they will be thankfully dropping after this year. And no, I'm not talking about the cars, as sadly that isn't changing for the WRC, I'm talking about the hybrid technology. As we have seen in WRC and in many other sports that have adopted this technology, the hybrids are very expensive to run, and that's despite the fact that the hybrid technology in all the cars are made by the same company, which is Cosworth in case anyone is wondering. The reason why it has drove up the cost is because the hybrid technology is being ran alongside the same engine formula that had already been used in the BTCC before the hybrids came in. So for example, each of the teams on the grid has the option of what sort of engine they want powering their cars. They can either build their own engine in accordance with the regulations, or they can use a standard engine from Toka, which has been built by M-Sport, the same company that runs the Ford program in WRC. Before the hybrids came in, there were only 2 elements that teams had to maintain across the season. That was the car itself and of course the engine. However, since the hybrid technology came in, which replaced the success ballast, it's added another element for the teams to maintain, which means of course more money is being pumped in to ensure the car is functioning properly. Now for a manufacturer team like West Surrey Racing, Accelerate, Speedworks and Motorbase, it isn't too much of a problem for them, as they have the finances to be able to maintain those 3 areas without running into any financial issues. However, for an independent team like One Motorsport and Team Hard, especially Team Hard who were running 6 Cooper Leons last year, that is a huge financial burden, and that is why we are seeing these teams either drop out or merge with another team. Or in the case of Team Hard, change their minds, and it is also why we are seeing less car makers on the grid. So what can be done to fix this? Well, for me, there are 2 options, and one of them for me should be a last resort. One option would be to scrap the hybrid technology, and despite not being a fan of it originally, but not seeing much other options as a viable replacement, I would bring back the success ballast to replace the push-to-pass system in order to ensure the costs are brought down and to ensure the independent teams are able to run an entire season without the risk of running into any financial issues. On top of this, and to ensure the series is able to reduce its carbon footprint, I would have every car in the series run on sustainable fuels, and then eventually in time have them run on fuel that produces 0 carbon. By doing this, not only would they reduce their carbon footprint, but they would also ensure that they are leaving an impact on the environment in a cost-effective way to ensure the teams don't run into any financial issues. The second option is one I consider as a last resort option, and that is to scrap the NGTC regulations and merge with their affiliate championship TCR UK to bring in the TCR regulations. Now personally, I don't want the series to ever go down the TCR route, as I feel the NGTCs have given the BTCC a personality that makes them different from most other touring car championships. However, if teams continue to drop out over the next few years, then I do believe that the series will need to consider taking this option if it wants to ensure its long-term future and also ensure it has a good enough grid size going forward, as we do not want the series to go back to a class system like we saw in the first 4 years of the 21st century. Nor do we want the series to go down the GT3 route like what DTM did over in Germany, as we already have a GT3 series in the UK called the British GT Championship. Anyways, those are my thoughts about the state of the British Touring Car Championship and what the series can do to rectify this. What do you guys think of the current climate of the BTCC? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you in 2 weeks' time for the next video. Till then, take care.